Well, Chad Daybell's letter number 3 paints a cozy picture of life in rural Idaho. The farms, Indian runner ducks, family business wins, and a string of fainting spells that conveniently suggest a natural decline in Tammy's health. But when you put that Hallmark reel next to the forensic evidence of Tammy's death and the conviction that's tied to this case that put Chad Daybell in prison with the death sentence, then the manipulation snaps into focus. And we're going to tear this letter apart line by line and expose Chad Daybell's psychological playbook. How he weaponizes specificity to fake credibility. How he spiritualizes illness to rationalize murder. And how he uses omission as a control tactic. And let's call it what it is, folks. These letters insult the victims. They wound these families over and again, and they reek of manipulation. This isn't remorse. It's a calculated rebrand of Chad Daybell from death row. Well, welcome to Profiling Evil. I'm coming to you from my third favorite spot here on the ranch, as promised. Now, as we get started on Chad Daybell's third rebranding attempt from death row, I hope you'll take a moment and hit the like and subscribe button. Make sure you got notifications turned on, that bell, and stick around and share us with your friends. Now, this letter is Chad Daybell's Salem chapter, and it's not the Salem witch hunts. He wants you to see a domestic Eden, a tidy move from Utah up to Idaho, where the kids are thriving, and this rural property that Tammy was flourishing on with her animals. It's nostalgia, pets, and pop culture rolled into a warm blanket, but you should be shivering down your spine right now. And I want you to pause with me right at the opening because it's doing a lot of heavy lifting, because he starts with location, chronology, family flourishing. He's making sure you feel the normalcy on purpose, the moves, schools, friends, the little farm. That combination plus family places everything together and creates credibility in a reader's mind. And that really matters, because if you accept the wholesome setup in your gut, cognitive dissonance will make the forensic realities a lot harder to deal with later. The anchoring comes first so that the harder facts have a softer place to land. And Chad Daybell, he leans into what I call the pet montage. He says Tammy has a soft spot for animals, so he talks about getting chickens and pigeons and cats and rabbits, and that they're all her favorites, but none are more favorite than the Indian runner ducks, and they're all named and they're all cherished. And I suspect Tammy did cherish those animals. Now, specifics like those are powerful because they feel like memories. And your brain hears details and it starts to relax. And you think to yourself, man, this is sounding real. That's specificity at work. And I'm not saying that the details are fabricated. I'm just saying that they're carefully deployed. They function as credibility laundering. The emotional effect is predictable. We go soft on caretakers, and we're more likely to extend sympathy to someone who appears to be gentle with animals. Now, if I were producing this for a video, I'd cut to close-ups of farm animals right now and then freeze frame with the word caretaker while I unpack the tactics. Because from there, Chad Daybell pivots to work and roles. He talks about how busy they were running their publishing company. He makes sure that you know that he was the president and the editor-in-chief, and that Tammy, she was the vice president and the chief financial officer. He says, that's where we built this together motif. Well, for a lot of viewers, business success signals kind of moral uprightness. But make no mistake, this is more halo polishing. And notice the subtle ordering. He's the visionary public face, and she's the operational backbone, the caretaker. Now that positioning feeds the later claim of him saying, "I always protected her," which the letter uses to suggest that a protector couldn't be a perpetrator. Well, then comes the medical storyline. He lays out Tammy Daybell's supposed year of decline, where he says she had holiday colds, chest congestion, deep cough all throughout 2019. She was having menopause symptoms. She had an exercise routine that was fading, and she was fatigued so much that she needed to sit down almost daily. Well, I need to sit down almost daily. In fact, I do sit down daily. Now, read together, it's plausible alternatives to homicide. And that aim is obvious. He's hoping to get a sympathetic, internally consistent explanation that a casual reader would substitute for the forensic facts. But look closely at the construction, folks, because there's lots of chronology, but there's little casual clarity. That's the trick. Give enough symptom detail to populate the maybe it was natural theme, but not one thing that would matter most: the exact sequence of the morning Tammy died. Now, Chad promises that that's going to be in a future letter. And I need to say this plainly. That kind of deferral is narrative leverage. It's not grief. It's a serial engagement tactic. Something like me saying, "And I'm going to tell you what really happened in just a moment." And then I go to a commercial. Now, leave them wanting more. That's the secret. Avoid being pinned down now so that you can control the framing of this later. Chad knows the value of sensory detail too. You end one chapter with enough of a hanger that somebody turns the page to the next. That's exactly what he's doing with these letters. They're short, humiliating moments where Tammy faints. She falls backwards. It's specific and human and embarrassing, and it does exactly what it's designed to do. It pulls at your empathy toward Tammy, and by extension, it softens your feeling about Chad, who's telling the story. People instinctively protect the embarrassed. The writer is leveraging that reflex, Chad's the writer here, to redirect your attention away from the investigator's questions. Now, the fainting thread repeats itself. He goes in and says, April 29, she blacks out. She hits the asphalt, maybe fractures her wrist, declines treatment, and takes an herbal remedy. He then says a religious trip includes another fainting episode. September brings another near repeat fall. Repetition reads like credibility, and that's what he's trying to do. Multiple similar incidents build the impression of an ongoing medical issue, and woven through those scenes is a repeated frame that she's resisting care. But make no bones about it, because in the testimony in trial, her friends talked about her running marathons and that she was active and outlook was great. This is responsibility displacement. The emphasis shifts toward her choices. She refused. She resisted going. And it goes away from Chad's actions, or maybe more importantly, his inactions. It's a quiet but important move. Then he spiritualizes the physical, which is incredibly offensive. He talks about Tammy complaining about out-of-body experiences with her spirit hovering above her. And inside their shared belief ecosystem, that kind of language has gravity. It normalizes odd sensations as spiritual signals. In a cultic or extreme religious frame, spiritualization can become the bridge that rationalizes ignoring doctors in favor of revelation. Even if Chad doesn't say that outright here, this framing sets right next to it, and it invites us, the followers, to suspend our skepticism. And then we hit the passage that he knows that we're waiting for, the day before she dies. Now he says she comes home from work, completely worn out, has a bad coughing fit, throws up. They go to sleep. He wakes. She's passed away. And then that line again. He'll describe that terrible morning and subsequent event in a future letter. Again, he's taking us to the edge and saying, but I'll tell you what happened a little later. That is the most crucial sequence in the entire letter, in my opinion, and he keeps it behind his curtain. On camera, if I were filming this, I'd read it slowly and I'd cut to black and I'd say, hey, pause right here. Pause for that refusal to detail the morning right here and right now. I mean, isn't the natural result grief at that moment? Isn't the narrative leverage? But seriality keeps our eyes on the feed. He avoids accountability and he stays in control as the writer. Then he switches gears to a story that blends the bookshelf faith with spiritual authority, saying family history work, an ancestor named Rachel, days later a visit from Tammy's grandmother who's dead. All are reasons and signals of this denominational legitimacy that he's pushing for. And it provides a supernatural confirmation story that validates his worldview. In manipulation and supernatural corroboration, he's cementing group identity. And he blunts any outside critiques by telling insiders, see, heaven's on our side. And he's hoping that you and I believe it. And before he signs off from that letter, Chad Daybell softens the close with music and nostalgia. He talks about country artists, where the green grass grows, family sing-alongs, driving in a truck through Fremont County back roads. And he ends on a melody that's purposeful, because music is effective glue. That's why I use the profiling evil theme. It leaves you with a warm taste and it lowers your skepticism. You end up humming a tune and you forget to ask the hard questions. And I gotta once again name the omission that screams from every stinking paragraph in this letter, and that is the omission of Lori Vallow. Because in a letter that claims to account for family life and Tammy's decline, there's barely a whisper about the woman with whom Chad was romantically and criminally entangled. The same one that he married within a few weeks of Tammy's death. The co-defendant who was later convicted of murder herself. That silence isn't grief, folks. Legally, silence will protect his appellate posture, and it avoids incriminating public statements, but narratively, the missing character creates plausible deniability. If he can erase Lori from this chapter in our minds, some readers might unconsciously downgrade her centrally. Now, emotionally, for the victims' families, that silence is a fresh wound re-entered. It recenters the perpetrator and it pushes the co-actor completely off stage. And what Chad wants to be is a victim in all of this. So when we pull back, the psychological patterning is very familiar. It's narrative identity construction. Chad is reauthoring himself as a family man, a publisher, a loving husband. It's cognitive dissonance management. It's denial and selective memory to reduce psychic pain. It's moral disengagement. It's omissions and victim-centered justifications trim culpability down to something palatable for him. It's impression management, precise specifics that are weaponized to signal authenticity. And it's serial engagement. I'll give you more later. Keep coming back. It keeps control of the conversation, and it's spiritual legitimization. These visitations from angels, all of this kind of goofy talk anchors him to a moral register with audience members that trust him. And he's hoping to get a few more to start to trust him. But none of that proves intent or innocence. What it does is it maps the tactics. Now, we talk a lot about language, and again, I want to just tell you about wolves in sheep's clothing, because for decades, I've watched predators twist words, not just to justify what they've done, but to confuse people into making sense of what they've done. And if you'd like to learn more about this kind of stuff, I'd invite you to pick up my book, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing. If you live in the United States, I'll sign the book for free and I'll ship it to you anywhere in the States for free. Anywhere else in the world, you can get it through Amazon or through Ingram Press, and it's in paperback, hardback, ebook, and audiobook. Now people often ask me, so then what would genuine remorse look like or sound like in a letter? Well, it would not sound like this. It wouldn't be more origin stories or more withheld chapters. Real contrition would sound more like unambiguous ownership. Things like, I acted, I chose, I did this. It would be specific detail. I made decisions that led to murder. I felt pressure, but it went to murder. Or the timeline of the final morning, now, not in a future installment. It would be acknowledging the dynamics of Lori Vallow, her role, and how their decisions were intertwined. And it would be corroborated behaviorally by private statements like reaching out to the family to ask for forgiveness, or telling law enforcement a little bit more about the case that they didn't know. So absent those markers, all we've got is a persuasive PR plan, not a confession. And let me be as clear as I can, folks, because I am personally offended by these letters when I hold them against the faces of the names that we should be saying. Names like Tammy Daybell, Tylee Ryan, J.J. Vallow, Charles Vallow, Brandon Bedreau. Letter number 3 is about ducks, coughs, fainting spells, and radio songs. It's not about homicide. It's not about Lori Vallow. It's not about accountability. It's persuasion disguised as remembrance. It takes up the cultural oxygen that should belong to the victims and their families, and it uses that oxygen to keep a convicted killer at the center of this story. And that's not just manipulation, it's cruelty. Now I want you to listen to the AI voice reading the full text of letter number 3 after this breakdown. It's clearly labeled and intentionally neutral so that you can hear the cadence of the letter without granting him presence. Hear how the rhythm of the lines does all the work, and then hold the letter in one hand and the public record of his murder conviction in the other. The excavation of those children, the timelines, the texts, the testimonies, and the verdicts. One is sentimental vignettes. The other is the truth that the jury weighed. Let's listen to letter number 3.
Letter number 3. My previous letter concluded with Tammy and I moving with our children from Utah to Idaho in 2015, and I will continue from that point. We bought a home north of Rexburg in an area known as Salem. Our children were enrolled at either BYU Idaho or Sugar Salem High School, and they made some wonderful friends. Tammy also flourished in our new surroundings. She loved the rural lifestyle, with plenty of property to create her own little farm. She'd always had a soft spot in her heart for animals, but in Springville, we'd had a small yard that limited the types of pets we could have. However, soon after we arrived in Idaho, Tammy began to assemble an ever-growing family of pets, including chickens, pigeons, cats, a rabbit, and of course, Tammy's favorite pet, Indian rudder ducks. She named them all and enjoyed caring for them. She also created several garden areas around the property she would carefully maintain. After moving to Idaho, Tammy and I stayed busy running our publishing company. I was the president and editor-in-chief, while she was the vice president and chief financial officer. I was also making good money writing a weekly online column, along with receiving royalties on my published books. We felt blessed, so Tammy didn't need to work beyond her company duties. But several years earlier in Springville, she had taken a part-time position as the computer lab teacher at our children's elementary school. She loved working with the students, and the job was very rewarding to her. When we prepared to move to Idaho, Tammy looked for a similar position, and she was hired as the assistant librarian at Madison Middle School in Rexburg. She was later hired as the librarian at Central Elementary in Sugar City, which was much closer to our home. She also took on the task of creating a computer lab at the school, modeled after the one she'd had in Springville. I would visit Tammy at the elementary school every couple of weeks, and I helped her out during open house events such as back-to-school night. It was fun to be greeted by the students as Mrs. Daybell's husband. Tammy had always strived to be physically fit, and in Idaho, she turned part of our front room into her workout area. She enjoyed doing yoga, and she liked to play several exercise video games, such as Just Dance, Walk It Out, and Exerbeat. It wasn't until the final year of her life that she started having noticeable physical setbacks. She caught a cold during the holidays, and she battled chest congestion and a deep cough throughout early 2019. She was also experiencing menopause symptoms with regular hot flashes. She was now 48, but she said she felt she had aged 10 years in just a few months. Her exercise routine faded away, and she became content to just sit on the couch, watch TV, and work on her laptop. My children and I encouraged Tammy to visit her doctor for a full health exam, but she resisted going. She had grown up with a firm belief in using holistic medicine and natural healing remedies to regain her health. I had seen these methods produce many positive effects over the years, with Tammy having rapid recoveries. But this time seemed different, as if something had shifted within her body. I regret not being more insistent in having her get a physical exam, because there were 4 major reasons for concern, and they all got worse as 2019 progressed. First, there were Tammy's lengthy colds and prolonged coughing fits. Second were her lethargy and overall lack of energy. This wasn't the same woman who could work in the garden and care for her animals all evening without stopping. She began using the phrase, "need to sit down," almost daily after any sustained physical activity. The third reason for concern were her swollen joints and bloating in her abdomen. Tammy initially tried to brush off these symptoms as temporary water retention, but they never went away. One day she came up to me and partially lifted her shirt. She grabbed hold of her belly and said, "Look at this. I can almost hear my guts sloshing around." Around that same time, Tammy and my son attended a health wellness fair. They were examined by a nurse who was bothered by how swollen Tammy's legs were, and that she had developed varicose veins. The nurse urged her to see a doctor about it, but Tammy refused. She finally admitted that her condition might be more serious when she called me into the bedroom one afternoon. I found her sitting on the edge of the bed, wiping away tears from her eyes. It was late August 2019, and the new school year was about to begin. As she sat on the bed, she had a pair of pants halfway up her legs. She said, "These pants fit me just fine at the end of the school year. Now I can't even get them over my hips." She stood up and demonstrated to me in frustration. None of her other school pants fit either. We went to the store the next day to buy replacements, and she ended up having to go up 2 pant sizes. She was very discouraged about it, and she eventually resorted to wearing full-length skirts most of the time to school. The fourth cause of concern was a series of fainting spells. Tammy felt her equilibrium was being affected, as well as her stamina. It wasn't unusual to find her in the kitchen with both hands on the counter, with her head down. She would say, "I'm okay, I'm just a little dizzy." Tammy's first major fainting incident happened in April 2019. She had finished putting the animals away for the night, and as she crossed the back driveway, she blacked out and crashed forward onto the asphalt, injuring her wrist. She came into the house and explained what happened, saying her wrist might be broken. I urged her to go to the emergency room, but she refused. She took an herbal remedy instead, and the pain went away in a few days. That summer, we went to the LDS temple, and during one of the ceremonies, Tammy fainted, collapsed backward, and then threw up all over the front of her dress. She was very embarrassed as the temple's medical team rushed into the room to care for her. In September, she essentially repeated her fall in the back driveway. She fell in almost the exact spot and re-injured her wrist. This time she didn't object when I insisted on taking her to the doctor, who prescribed pain medication and gave her a wrist brace to help heal the damage. I suggested she take a couple of school sick days to recuperate, but she shook her head and said, "No way. You know how much I hate a substitute messing up the library. I'll just sit there if I have to." From that day on, the setbacks came more frequently. Her nose was running constantly, and she would have sneezing fits. She also began to complain she was having out-of-body experiences. She described how her spirit would hover above her body for a few seconds at a time. In early October, One of those incidents happened while I was in the living room and she was in the kitchen. I suddenly heard a loud crash and I rushed into the kitchen to find Tammy had actually fainted into the open fridge. She had landed hard against one of the shelves and was slumped down in the bottom half. I helped her stand up and told her I was very worried about her. She just waved her hand and asked me to help her lay down on the couch. The day before she passed away, she came home completely worn out from setting up the displays for the school's upcoming book fair. That evening, she told family members she wasn't feeling well, and later had a bad coughing fit before throwing up. We went to sleep, and when I woke the next morning, she had passed away. I will describe that terrible morning and subsequent events in a future letter. But as word spread of her death, everyone was devastated, because she had been such a powerful, wonderful influence to so many people. We all feel that loss every day. I miss her and love her. Tammy was a true angel on earth, and I know she is still watching over our family. My children and I have felt her presence many times since her death. We sense she is particularly interested in her precious grandchildren. We believe families can be together forever in heaven, and although she has moved on ahead of us, we know we will be reunited with her someday. Bookshelf members of the LDS Church seek to find their ancestors because we believe that if people don't learn about the gospel of Jesus Christ in this life, they will have the opportunity to do so in the spirit world after they die. We believe they will be able to reunite with their loved ones there and live as families in heaven. That's why the LDS Church builds beautiful temples across the world, so gospel ordinances can be performed in behalf of our ancestors. Throughout the 1990s, that was a key focus for us and our extended family members. We completed the temple work for hundreds of ancestors over a period of years. Then later on, we discovered that a woman named Rachel Marler had been overlooked in our records. Several years had passed since the temple work had been done for Rachel's parents and siblings, and we sensed she was very anxious to join her family in paradise. We submitted Rachel's name for temple work, and when family members performed ordinances in Rachel's behalf, they could feel her presence in the temple, as if she was watching them take place. The unusual part came 2 days later when Rachel appeared to Tammy's grandma, Lucille. Rachel stood at the end of Lucille's bed as a spirit dressed in white, and she told Lucille how grateful she was that she could now join her family in paradise. One interesting fact is that soon after Rachel visited Lucille, we found an actual photo of her taken in the 1800s. Lucille saw the photo and verified that the woman in the photo was the same woman who had appeared to her in her bedroom. That is why when I wrote Chasing Paradise, the main family has the last name of Marler, and why Lucille plays a key role. As I wrote the novel, it evolved into a full-blown adventure that takes place both on Earth and in the spirit world as a young woman seeks to reunite with her family in paradise. Musical notes. Tammy and I enjoyed taking our kids on several day trips each year. One memorable trip was when we decided to visit the city of Preston, where the ultimate Idaho movie Napoleon Dynamite was filmed. Our family has watched the film often enough that we can quote the dialogue by heart. For this little adventure, Tammy printed off an online guide and map that showed the locations where key scenes took place. We drove slowly past the downtown landmarks, then stopped to take photos next to Napoleon's tetherball pole. Finally, we began our quest to find the Dynamite family home. It was surprisingly quite a ways out of town, but we found it. Growing up, the song Private Idaho by the B-52s was my main connection to the Gem State. But that song is clearly not a fair representation of the lifestyle or the musical tastes of eastern Idaho, where Rexburg is located. A better fit is Tim McGraw's Where the Green Grass Grows. Just replace the line about his corn popping up in rows with spuds, and it works. I love driving in my truck along the Fremont County backroads with the windows rolled down, potato fields on every side, and the Grand Tetons in the distance. I just remembered one detail. It snows about 9 months of the year, but we certainly stayed busy during the winter. Our youngest son was in the high school pep band and was also a star in the school musical, and it was fun to watch him as we sat among our friends and neighbors. I also enjoyed cheering for the Sugar Salem athletic teams. Then the snow would melt for a while, and we would explore the outdoors, such as Mesa Falls, or float down the Henry's Fork River. 3 of my children are raising their families in the Rexburg area. And I'm grateful my grandchildren will grow up in a peaceful place with good people, where the green grass grows.
Well, I'd really like your thought on this. Are these letters offensive to you? Are they manipulative? Do they strike you as PR or contrition? I hope you'll put your comments down below, and I hope you'll weigh in on each other. And watch for letter number 4, which is going to drop soon. But before I end, I rewrote Chad Daybell's letters with what I think he was thinking as he wrote the letter. Let's catch that. So now let's look at Chad Daybell's letter number 3. He's picking up where he left off after letter number 2. He said, Tammy and I moved to Idaho in 2015. A new home, a new community, a new chapter. Hey, are you seeing how I'm framing this like we're an idyllic family migration? I mean, if I keep the imaginary pastoral farms, the kids, the ducks, it creates this Norman Rockwell scene that pushes aside the reality of those shallow graves and investigative waitings in the wings. Now, I want to talk about Tammy's little farm for a minute because I think this is really going to be helpful. I'm going to describe Tammy as flourishing, she had gardens, chickens, rabbits, Indian runner chicks, Indian runner ducks. Notice the strategy here. If I make her look vibrant, wholesome, and animal loving, I get to co opt her goodness because I'm also priming the audience here. I mean, who could harm somebody so kind as this description of Tammy Daybell? Answer, I want you to think, not me, not Chad Daybell, because we're the perfect couple, and that's got to be my next narrative. Let's talk about how we're running the publishing company. I'm the visionary, and she's the financial officer. This power couple that we've become, this branding is psychological and it's shielding because I can convince people that if our marriage is depicted as professionally successful and spiritually strong, then suspicion of tension, infidelity, or motive would sound absurd to you. And when she was working as the librarian, I'll just kind of write myself into the story as Mrs. Daybell's husband. Can you see the humility play I've got going here? It's calculated. I mean, let me look like the sidekick instead of the authoritarian. Never mind the books that I later write about multiple lives and apocalyptic visions and dying and all of that. And since we're on this kind of a really weird twist, let's talk about her health decline. Part 2 of what I've already talked about. She was already sick, and how that's a strategy for me, because here's where the letter turns. Tammy was this once vibrant, beautiful woman who suddenly deteriorated. She was coughing, she was fainting, she was going through menopause, she had varicose veins. I can line up symptoms like dominoes here, and the psychological trick would be that if I pile enough medical detail, the reader will get lost in the health narrative instead of wondering why the state exhumed her body and found me guilty of murder. Now, I'll even stage some regrets, like I should have insisted that she see a doctor. This is the guilt deflection move because it creates the illusion of a concerned husband while subtly planting the idea that her death was natural, unavoidable, and conveniently not my fault. Now, notice the out of body experience anecdote I'm putting in here because that's a spiritual spin at work. If Tammy's talking about her soul floating above her body, it nudges the reader toward the afterlife framework that I'm selling. So instead of the forensic facts that condemn me, they might think there's something spiritual going on. But you know what? In every story, there's the morning after. I'll have to put in here that she had a bad cough, that she threw up, that she went to bed, and the next morning, she was gone. Notice the casual tone. I'm going to minimize the moment of death. I'm going to breeze right past it and immediately pivot to the community grief. That's narrative sleight of hand. So skip the forensic red flags, folks. Spotlight the emotions. Because Tammy now is the angel. She isn't just remembered, she's angelified. I say she's watching over us, especially our grandchildren. This is a tactical sanctification because if she's in heaven, then I'm not the villain. I'm just a grieving widower who still honors her. It's a psychological pivot from suspicion to sympathy. So let's now take a moment and build who I am by talking about the bookshelf section because I segue into the LDS beliefs about families being together forever. And conveniently, I throw in an ancestral spirit story, that story of Tammy's grandma, where she sees a spirit in her bedroom who's dressed in white. And this is a narrative that I take advantage of because if ghosts show up for grandma, maybe Tammy's presence is now equally divine. It's not suspicious. You see, by folding Tammy's death into a tapestry of spiritual visitations, I can dilute the criminal context and recast it all as sacred destiny. So let's kind of wrap in some musical notes because, again, I want to end with something outstanding, explosive, like Napoleon Dynamite. We'll talk about road trips, pep bands, spuds, and Tim McGraw. This is a classic psychological exit strategy. I'm going to leave the readers humming a country song instead of dwelling on the dead bodies and the criminal charges and the convictions for murder. Well, let's think about where the green grass grows. That might become my final image. Family, fields, grandkids, peace. Because if you picture potatoes and sunsets, you're less likely to think about duct tape, shallow graves, or conspiracy charges. So, in the end, the real playbook here, folks, is step number one: paint the move to Idaho as idyllic. Number two, flood the reader with Tammy's goodness so that I can bask in the borrowed light. Step number three, build a detailed health collapse story. Death by natural decline, not homicide. Step number four, pivot grief into religion because her death isn't suspicious, it's all part of God's plan. And then step number five, end on nostalgia and music so that the readers walk away feeling warm, not scared and wary. Well, folks, you can find Profiling Evil on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Twitter. And if you like your true crime on the go, check out Profiling Evil's audio podcasts on your favorite podcast platform. There's a reason we were nominated for the 2025 CrimeCon People's Choice Award, and I am so grateful for every one of you who voted. It's compelling me to try to provide more quality videos for you to watch. Hey, visit profilingevil.com and sign up for our digital newsletter, The Bolo. And thanks for your support. We'll see you soon from these beautiful mountains in northern Utah. We'll see you soon at the next crime scene.